Now that we have a basic understanding of the market forces of supply and demand, let's implement those market tools of supply and demand to gain a bit more knowledge into the oil market and how changes in either supply or demand caused by events throughout the world will alter this state of equilibrium that economists use to analyze markets. So today is the 26th of September 2016. If we look on the vertical axis, we have price. So P star, assume we are going to use today's price, that is roughly $45 per barrel. That's the price of a barrel of oil in the market at equilibrium today. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 million barrels of oil bought and sold will be displayed on your Q star down bottom on the quantity axis, the horizontal axis. We've already examined who are the buyers or demanders of oil and which nations produce or supply oil. From here, we're going to determine what happens when there's either an increase or a decrease in demand or a decrease or increase in supply. Let's assume this supply and demand graph represents the global oil market in the early 1990s. What economic event was about to take place which would significantly and severely alter the landscape when it comes to the oil markets? China was in the economic doldrums for decades. The Great Leap Forward, which was the vision of Mao, actually created economic misery within the country of China. And eventually, leadership decided to do an about-face and embrace some market-based economic reforms. These market-based economic reforms completely reinvigorated the Chinese economy. China went from a forgotten economy to a global producer of many goods consumed by people in other industrialized countries. In order to accomplish this economic marvel, China needed to increase its demand for basic economic inputs, the resources necessary to produce goods and services. One of these resources is oil. So the rebirth of China created a significant increase in demand for oil. An increase in the number of buyers, in this case the Chinese, has an interesting impact on the price-quantity relationship or equilibrium in the oil market. This is going to drive up the quantity of oil necessary as far as economic events across the globe are concerned, and it's going to increase the price of a barrel of oil. The previous picture of supply and demand explained how the increase in demand for oil created by the economic explosion of China drove the price of oil up. How far up did the price of oil go? Oil was actually trading at nearly $150 a barrel in 2004. Let's assume that this is the market for oil in 2006. The price of oil had retreated somewhat, but it was still significantly high and above $100 a barrel. However, the entire globe was about to feel the wrath of the financial crisis of the mortgage-backed securities and the housing market of the United States. These two events created a global recession. Across the planet, all producers of goods and services decreased their demand for oil. In the real world, the price of oil dropped from in the hundreds all the way down to $20 per barrel or thereabouts. So now you understand that changes in demand can cause significant changes in the price of a barrel of oil. We just spent a bit of time examining how changes in demand affect the equilibrium in the oil market and the price and quantity relationship. How about when supply changes? In the early 70s, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, controlled a larger percentage of total oil production than they do currently. Therefore, OPEC had a stronghold on the oil markets. Any changes in production levels by OPEC could significantly increase or decrease the price of a barrel of oil. In economic terms, OPEC at this point, had a cartel in oil. That is, a small number of producers who controlled a large percentage of the markets. OPEC would meet several times throughout the year and determine how much they would either increase, decrease, or perhaps leave oil production level at that time. In October of 1973, OPEC decided to significantly decrease oil production. If we look at the supply and demand situation on this graph, assuming that S1 was the supply of oil prior to OPEC's decision, and demand is the global demand for oil, the leftward shift of supply from S1 to S2, the decrease in supply, creates a significant increase in the price of a barrel of oil. Oil increases in price from $20 to roughly $40 a barrel. In reality, oil did almost double in quite a short time in the United States. How did this negative supply shock affect the U.S. economy? At this point in U.S. economic history, the United States was much more of a manufacturing-based economy, much like China is today. Therefore, one of the principal economic inputs of that manufacturing-based economy was oil. A significant increase in the price of oil drove up the cost of production for a large percentage of goods and services. This created significant inflation in the economy, which means that households, individuals, when they go to the store to buy goods, have to pay much more for those goods. Likewise, it could have potentially created a significant increase in the price of gasoline. However, Richard Nixon and the other pieces of the federal government decided it was in the best interest to try to keep gasoline prices at a reasonable price. Therefore, they instituted a price ceiling for the price of a barrel of gasoline. Now, most of the time, government interactions or interventions in economic markets create negative secondary effects. What were the negative secondary effects of the government price ceiling in the gasoline market? At first, it created extremely long lines for gasoline and gasoline shortages because the sellers of gasoline were only willing and able to sell a certain amount of gasoline at that price. The United States government had to go one step further and actually determine when people could buy gasoline based on the last number in their license plate. So if your license plate had an odd number ending, 13579, you were allowed or permitted to buy gasoline on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And if you had an even number, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday were your days to buy gasoline, and no gasoline was sold on Sundays. Now you're getting a bit of an understanding of how changes in the price of oil create serious economic effects. We have just determined that a severe decrease in supply of oil creates some serious negative economic effects. What about an increase in the supply of oil? Well, pictured on the board here we have equilibrium 1, price 1, and quantity 1. Any new discoveries of oil would increase supply and therefore drive quantity of oil available up and price of oil down. Directional drilling and fracking has created this exact scenario. So, from the standpoint of the United States, the ability to access previously inaccessible oil through these two techniques of directional drilling and fracking has caused both a drop in the price of oil and a significant amount of energy independence. Now all of you have some basic background information about oil consumers, demanders, and oil producers, suppliers. You also have an introductory level of economic thinking when it comes to markets and how markets work and how markets determine equilibrium price and quantity, and how changes in supply and demand affect this equilibrium. The remainder of this feedback block is going to be you investigating the geopolitical, environmental, and economic issues associated with the price of a barrel of oil. Of course, these three major areas of study are not mutually exclusive, and by no means can you discuss one without considering the others.